the economy, but families and communities as well. Also, I'm honored to be with you at Soaring Eagle this morning. Thanks for your gamble on my speaking ability. I hope the bet pays off. Personally, I've altered my bets. You see, it was yesterday morning, the dog came over to me while I was on my recliner and said, let's change our investment strategy. You fetch the paper and I'll make the stock picks. Now, Bob emailed me about a week ago suggesting that the audience would probably by this time be thirsting for good economic news. Not only that, but when you consider all the recent political venom, the vitriol, the vituperations, past, present, and obviously prospective, I also thought it was a good idea to start with all the good economic news. So, okay, now let's move on. Not really. If anything, as we move into 2011, I have tangible reasons for greater economic optimism than I had 2 years ago. The next 25, 30 minutes, let me share with you the two most likely public policy alternatives I think that will determine whether this year, 2011, and the coming decade will be one of economic and financial growth or decay for Michigan and for the U.S. Folks, we're clearly at a crossroads this year. Are we going to revive a once prosperous, confident economic system, or are we really going to live the end game by surrendering our market dynamism, submit to greater dependence on government? So here's the first investment scenario. Like many nations in the Eurozone, throughout Latin America, Michigan and the U.S. have literally been embracing anti-market behaviors that consign us to a has-been status on the world scene. There is no middle road when it comes to broadening our financial economic options and improving our incentives to work and to profit. We simply must adopt the prudent spending and borrowing behaviors. We have to deepen our commitments to personal responsibility. After all, sound economic systems are based on what? They're based on competitive markets, and markets are rooted in strong property rights, moral, ethical behaviors, and that goes for firms, it goes for households, and it certainly goes for elected officials. This isn't Dave Lippman. This is the wisdom, at least 252 years old, captured in Adam Smith, Father of Economics, book on the theory of moral sentiments back in 1759. So if our economic and judicial systems have truly degenerated into a rule of man rather than a rule of law under a constitution, then monetary and fiscal and regulatory, all of those policies, they become arbitrary, unpredictable, a veritable morass, a cesspool of uncertainty. And that's where we are today. You all recognize that. And the system attempting to really regain its equilibrium, as markets do, attempting to crawl out from under a swamp of uncertainty, which we're in. I mean, heck, if you think about it, not only did Washington fail to pass a budget, they also failed to enact a tax code until the very last moment of last year. As you folks know better than anyone else I can think of, the very essence of competitive markets is that they represent the most phenomenal system ever devised for handling risk. Markets transform risk into a quantifiable actuarial science, complete with risk-reward metrics, probabilities and rates of return, and they're all within specified time horizons. And competitive markets help consumers thereby, and producers alike, conduct independent audits of what we buy, what we sell, along with the prices at which we do so. So really, markets spin risk into gold. But uncertainty is a killer. In stark contrast to handling risk-based initiatives, whether they're inventions or investments, prolonged periods of uncertainty destroy markets by severing the most important things, and that's trust among people and transactors and confidence. And those are the components that are integral to rational planning and to healthy risk-taking. So today, it's this uncertainty that bars the way to what by now should have been an exceptional real GDP growth for the nation and for the state. And when I say growth, I mean growth in payrolls, growth in profits, growth in wealth, growth in confidence. So now you know why economists make accountants look like the life of the party. But let me explain. People are rational. I'll give you an example. I mean, a household may be poor. Some firms may be hurting. That doesn't mean they're stupid. Uncertainty induces households to save more, not spend more. Likewise, the threat of being legislatively or judicially whipsawed by Washington or by Lansing, and their ever unpredictable and changing regulations and tax and spend policies, all that does is add to caution and delay. So if we analyze current U.S. economic conditions, to me there are two features that stand out. First, we're in the midst of an economic dead cat bounce. That's hardly the PC thing I've been told to say with having 6 lovely cats at home, but nevertheless, you drop a cat from a 10-story building, and chances are by the time it reaches the pavement, it'll bounce. That doesn't mean the animal has a lot of life left in it. I think about it. Typically emerging from an economic blowout, the magnitude that we experienced in 2007, 2009, in many ways the worst since the Great Depression, you'd expect a soaring comeback if we were in the normal cyclical situation. And in fact, you look around you, and this is exactly what the traditional forces of the marketplace are desperately trying to arrange for us. Think about it. You got the leading economic indicators, like the yield curve. A yield curve has never, in all my 50 years of tracking business cycles, the 50 years, I have never seen the yield curve fail to predict within 6 to 9 months the actual movements of the economy. And it's never been as positive, not just for a month or a quarter or for half a year, but for at least 2 years, at least 2.5 years. This yield curve is as positive as I've ever seen it. Yield curve meaning constructive, positive yield curve where the long-term rates at 3.6, 3.7 are hugely above the short-term rate like the one-year Treasury, or what I use is the Federal Reserve 0.25%. So you got a 3.5% positive yield curve, which says, yeah, you're going to have, which we do, have a recovery. But it should be not at the levels of 1.5% real growth, but somewhere up in the 7 to 10%. That's what the yield curve would give us now. The monetary liquidity is stupendous. They've been doing nothing but printing money. The balance sheet of Federal Reserve Bank, the monetary authorities, the central bank, is now $2.5 trillion. They're just in the process of putting another $600 billion of funny money into the system. That liquidity is all out there. The hourly work week is very, as firms work their existing labor forces more intensively, the productivities are phenomenal. You have an excellent buildup in profits. That's one reason the stock market has moved progressively higher. Now, you add to those fundamental leading indicators the kickstart cyclical features such as the pent-up demand factors. As I said, people are saving. and they're postponing the purchase, especially the large ticket durable goods like automobiles. Your inventories are lean and mean, ready to surge. The productivity, as I mentioned, and its implications for confidence. Saving rate, it's the best I've seen in a decade. It's exceeding 5%. It was negative before this balloon popped. What people are doing, this is very fundamental. I wish I could educate the Federal Reserve Board on it, but that seems impervious. But people and firms, in a period of uncertainty, what they do is they build up their cash to asset ratio. So it's a stock concept for the accountants in the room. You build up that ratio until you're comfortable, and once you're comfortable, the things are okay, you got the confidence restored, that converts into what we call GDP, or a flow variable. And that's a prelude. A high saving rate is a prelude to the restoration of normal economic expansion. And then real estate. If you look at real estate, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at office or residential, commercial or industrial, the prices are at bargain basement levels. The real deal. And the same goes for your state-of-the-art capture of technology and machine tools and so forth. So capital equipment, all of those things. So that's another add-on to what is really a force for optimism, that the market is poised to go orbital. And again, I'll impose on that factor the advances in technology, whether it's Facebook or iPhones or whatever. You have a rapidly expanding global market as well. I'm not talking just of India and China, which offer us potentially billions of new customers moving into the middle class to demand our products, whether they're farm, agricultural products, retail, entertainment, consulting, legal, whatever it is. So, bottom line, having a dead cat bounce it just is not a wholesome situation. It's truly an anomaly. The second central affliction of today's economy comes from severe headwinds. I can mention 6 of them. They're all wrapped up in government-induced policy fogs. One, as you know, are the tax rates and the fees that will be rising over the next 2 years. Doesn't even include the 3.8% Obama tax, so-called. Again, there's nothing durable or something durable enough to hang a hat on in terms of planning if you're in business or if you're an entrepreneur. Second headwind, you continue in this nation unbelievably to pursue insane energy policies. Energy's the key to everything in a modern economy. And of course, last year they were trying to give us, what was it, cap and trade. Well, cap and trade would have catapulted energy prices, destroyed somewhere on the order of 4 million jobs, and reduced household incomes in the vicinity of $4,000 to $7,000 annually. Well, you can say, folks, that we dodged that bullet. But government doesn't work like that. It works by stealth. And if it doesn't get the millage passed or the policies passed this year, they're going to come at you through the back door. And they did, and they are. And it's called renewable energy credits, RECs. And so all they've done is transmogrify the vocabulary to give us something else as a subsidy. Subsidy to what? Wind power. Well, wind power is 75% more expensive than coal. Solar, 700% under its extant technology, more expensive than coal, our most abundant resource. But then they take off the shelf, take off the board the oil shale, the gas, and nuclear, essentially all of that. So out the window goes scarce income as your energy prices rise and everything that goes into it in terms of products. So that's a severe headwind. It's one that has to be overcome. Third headwind would be the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve's in a box. It has to raise rates. Most countries throughout the world have already begun the process. Doesn't mean you have to leap them by 2-3 percentage points, but you got to start the movement, or else you know where the dollar goes. Instead, the Fed's creating fiat money. Is there any wonder in your mind why gold and all other commodity prices are soaring? Essentially, the Federal Reserve, folks, is creating the next bubble, just like Bernanke's predecessor, Greenspan, created the same situation, and it burst in the form of the real estate market. So, too, Bernanke's doing it in the stock market. So it has to be brought to its senses. And when I talk about their flight from reality, I wonder if you recall the words of the philosopher, in this case Ayn Rand. She said, "You can ignore reality, yeah. You cannot ignore the consequences of ignoring reality." Well, that's where we are. Only the Fed doesn't know it. A fourth headwind, of course, is the Treasury, the unfunded liabilities. I don't want to talk too much about it, but you can see China and other nations are already balking at holding any more of our longer-term bonds. The unfunded liabilities, they don't really go into, including the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, which are still being subsidized, still in business. The state and local pensions and health care systems, unfunded liabilities that now amount in aggregate, the whole shebang, to some $110 to $112 trillion by the year 2080. What a legacy. But the central problem is this: with the prospect for real GDP growth nowhere even remotely near the 3 percentage points real that are necessary to bring down unemployment rates or defease these incredible liabilities, what do you suppose happens to the value of the dollar or to the inflation rates? And what I'm telling you is this: unless this process is rolled back, beginning in a very big way with this Congress, talking nationally, I predict that 2011, no later than the end of 2012, will see the Chinese end its purchase of U.S. debt, especially the long-term securities, and this will end effectively the dollar as a reserve currency. And then Katie barred the door on inflation. Listen, I could go into regulations, which now cost $1.75 trillion annually, 16% of our economy, most of which hasn't been vetted or cost-benefit rationalized, and so forth. I could go into the government spending compared to the private sector compensation rates, which you'll hear more about, fortunately, on the news. I could go into all that, but I'm sure there's a lot you could hand me. So this first scenario assumes that the current policies continue regardless of political party. This is clearly, in my estimation, an end game. It's not an economic or investment scenario, frankly, that I want to discuss. And if I did discuss it, it would begin with, let us pray. Just to put a final note on that, we can't appropriate money we don't have in order to bail out Germany that's attempting to bail out the rest of the EU. We can't keep our corporate tax rates the highest in the world when we see nations around us, including Canada, moving their corporate tax rates to half of that of ours, includes Switzerland and some of the others. We can't keep subsidizing home buyers who might very well afford rentals but aren't ready yet to step up to home ownership. And we can't keep taxing the marginal workers in order to subsidize unemployment for up to 99 weeks. It's funny money, it's not real, and it's a burden. The key to continuity of an effective market system are the incentives to work, to save, to invest, to profit. Sadly, most of our incentives have been inverted. So we have to get that back. And Washington and Lansing, they wonder why the economy can't sustain this growth fast enough to bring down the unemployment rates, which aren't really at 9%, folks. When you look hard at the type of unemployment and you compare it to what we had in the 1930s. You're looking at nationwide something on the order of 16% in Michigan, probably upwards of 22%. So this ain't rocket science. It takes growth of 3% real GDP sustained for at least 6 months to reduce the unemployment rate. So unless you have incentives, not 2 years of not tax relief, but holding the tax rates where they are, which are uncompetitive, but permanently moving them down, then our political scene destabilizes, which of course makes our military situation more laughable and serious, precarious as well. But folks, therein lies the good news. Our second scenario, what we witnessed in 2010, for example, a rejection, revulsion, if you will, on the part of a vast and I think growing portion of America to what the politicians have ratified and done. So I think that message, whether it's New Jersey, whether it was Massachusetts, Virginia, now Wisconsin, Indiana, hey, Governor, where are you here in Michigan? All that message is out there and it's spreading. The question I have, the only question I have is, will the momentum of the movement toward fiscal responsibility and less welfare and dependency endure long enough to transform a generation of decline into a generation of hope and economic renaissance? Now, I come from Missouri originally, and the state motto is "Show me." And it should be for us too. The index we need to carry on our bodies and our minds is one that focuses exclusively on evidence. I mean hard evidence that these 6 headwinds are being reversed in our favor. Concretely speaking, if those 6 headwinds are reversed, the U.S. economy is poised, as I said earlier, to go orbital. And the reason is that these headwinds suddenly become tailwinds. And as I say, that's going to make a very, very big difference on confidence. Now here's why, here's what gives me optimism that the second scenario will prevail. As I said earlier, the leading indicators are as positive as I've ever seen them. The inventory sales ratios are ready to surge. Pent-up demand for durables. Let me give you an example. I mean, autos close to Michigan's home, scrappage rates are now somewhere in the area of 9 to 12 million units per year. Those are add-on demand factors to normal growth in a year. The global growth in population, and again, it's not just China, India, it's as well Indonesia or Bangladesh. Those countries are also making use of the fluid technologies. So how does the U.S. return to sanity? How does Michigan return to sanity? How, differently stated, for the sake of our investment portfolios and peace of mind, do we identify early signs of this scenario number 2? First, there has to be exclusive focus on reducing government spending. We just heard from the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Michigan. He talked about tax programs. What is their euphemism? Fair, efficient. I'm trying to think of the other word. Simple. Yeah, fair, simple, and efficient. Well, Adam Smith, again, 234 years ago, had 4 axioms for good taxation. He left out the most important, and that's onerous. But that's not what I wanted to say. What I wanted to say is do not, I plead with you, do not listen to the words from a politician when it's debt, taxes, or deficit. If total government spending is rolled back in absolute terms, then you will know that prosperity, confidence, and dynamism will rapidly emerge. Government spending is the bogey. It's what government spends, not what it taxes. It's spending that is the true burden. Because what it doesn't tax, tax today, but is spending above what its revenues, is what it's going to tax tomorrow. statewide through taxation, fees, and whatever euphemisms they come up with, and nationally through inflation, the most insidious and devastating tax of all. So our nation has a spending problem, not a taxing problem. Revenues come streaming into a budget prodigiously and ubiquitously when confidence and incentives are restored to the marketplace, and we're not competitive. Anyway, it's far too late to just hold the line on public sector spending. We traversed that threshold decades ago. The crisis calls for severe elimination of all spending that isn't specifically, if you're looking at the nation, in Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. But the same applies when you're looking at state and local governments that are bankrupt. It's especially true, you see, in California, Illinois, New Jersey. Michigan comes in fifth. Indulge me. Let me see how we're doing. We're okay. Just a sidebar. Now, I know it's not fashionable to, at least in some quarters, to read or respect writings or thoughts, admonitions of our founding fathers or the seminal thinkers that we've had along the way who lived more than 100 years ago. Yet, it was 234 years ago, the father of economics, modern economics, Adam Smith, described the ultimate impact of federal spending and debt when he said, and I'll quote, "When national debts accumulate to a certain degree, there is scarcely a single instance of their ever having been fairly or fully paid." It was about the same time Ben Franklin, no dummy, he wrote, "When we are obliged to issue quantities of debt in excess, it pays itself off by depreciation." That's inflation. It's a debasement of the currency. Even Alexander Hamilton, who was the architect of America's first structured debt and successful debt repayment program, echoed the wisdom of both Smith and Franklin when he said, again, quote, "There is a tipping point beyond which additions to the national debt become deleterious." So he warned us about why we must avoid that tipping point. Again, quote, "To prevent that progressive accumulation of debt, which must ultimately endanger all government." He was no enemy of government. He saw the more than Jefferson was willing to admit. He saw the value of government under the Constitution, but he knew there was a tipping point. And I'll just put one final cap on that one. It was 1789, George Washington, after President's Day yesterday. He said, quote, "Paper money will invariably operate in the body of politics as spirit liquors on the human body. They prey on the vitals and ultimately destroy them." And these are the wisdoms. And they're a lot smarter than what we got in Washington and Lansing today. So the only way to reverse the evil outcomes, including the intergenerational theft that they entail, is to go for the government's jugular, and that's spending. Any former governor or former lieutenant governor of the state of Michigan, any tax system works if spending is under control and has some alignment with the realities of what the tax base and the population is doing. All tax systems fail if the obverse is true. Second, during this decade, the things to watch for, policymakers need to enable citizens to substitute things such as the private health care savings accounts or something tantamount to a medical IRA for Medicare or Medicaid, personal IRAs, 401ks for Social Security, and competitive even playing field schools, whether they're home schools, parochial schools, private schools, cyber schools, charter magnet schools, whatever it is, for what we have as many failing public schools. Detroit school system, if you heard the news, is a classic case of where you need either annexation or removal, and given the money following the child choice for the parent to get the child into something that works. Again, it's elemental psychology, as far as I know, that if you have a small baby and he's got something that's not good for him, and you take it away, he's going to cry. So what you want is to substitute that rattle, whatever it is, or something that's less dangerous and that satisfies. And it's not the greatest analogy, but that's essentially politically and psychologically what has to happen. I think what you're seeing happen. It happened in Chile after the Social Security system went bankrupt. They have a very prosperous, a choice-oriented Social Security system. You're even seeing it in states like California, for goodness sakes. In Sacramento, if a public school doesn't come up to the outcomes necessary, they're failing. The parents, if they're 51%, pull the trigger. It's called the trigger. And they can get these kids into a charter school or whatever else will succeed. So you're seeing percolate this kind of hope. There's a third principle. I call it the YOUGO. Some people remember the YOUGO. It was a vehicle that not too many people wanted. But my point here is we have to accept the YOUGO principle. If the healthcare system is so good, you go first. Yeah. I mean, these legislators, they won't try on, what they assign to us. I want to see them go first if it's so darn good. Anyway, that ends the hypocrisy. Again, those, I'm sure, again, you could give me plenty from your own experience, very rich experience. So I ask you, what better economic and fiscal platform could there be for responsible individuals to retake control of a troubled state like Michigan, or reinforce the forces that are out there now pursuing the 2011 national economic reforms? And speaking of Michigan, Michigan has been, is now, and I think will continue to be, a microcosm of the U.S. For that matter, has been a fiscal precursor of the national dilemma. So here are my three top imperatives for turning around the environment in which you folks work. That is the state's economy, getting it returned from a precarious to a preeminent status. First, as I said, being congruent, do a Chris Christie, a minimum. You got to cut the state budget by at least 15%, which in Michigan's case is $6 billion. Again, this isn't just Lieutenant Governor Calley or the nerd. When the state officials talk about Michigan's budget, general fund, general purpose, at $8 billion, that ain't the budget. It's what they spend. What they spend. Anybody have a foggiest idea? The media isn't going to tell you, but it's always there, according to the census. So Washington has to do that as a due diligence. $47 billion annually. That's what the state spends. What they've continued to do is focus attention on the least. When I once took a course in PE at my undergraduate, I was running. I had very little time left. In fact, I had one course. I had to take a course that had 1.5 credits. That was a lot. I don't know how I'd forgotten, but I couldn't graduate without that. So I had a choice: sports officiating or boxing. So I chose boxing. And the coach, I remember, he said the first thing he said, what you all have to do is you take the ends of the heels of your hands and you just keep pushing them in as hard as you can into your gut. And he said, I guarantee you one thing, it'll either make them iron strong or it'll kill you. Well, I switched to sports officiating, which was even rougher. But anyway, but I do remember one thing that the coach said. He says, "Don't watch their eyes. Don't watch their feet. You watch their gut. That's the movement you got to watch if you're going to succeed." And it's the same thing. You don't watch what the politicians are trying to get you to see. It's always the other story, the fuller story. It's the forest, not just the trees. So that's really the most important thing. The Mackinac Center for Public Policy has come up with well over $8.25 billion annually of savings. Many of them are captured in the brochures that are out there for you. They're back in the room. Thank you. Which is called 101 Ways of Reducing. They include things like convergence of the 80% above private sector comparables benefits that our public officials here in Michigan receive. Includes the pay, which is 33% higher than the average comparable private sector. These are untenable, unsustainable types of that alone, by the way, folks, is I've audited these figures, $5.5 billion annually starting today. Includes competitively bidding, the 4 non-instructional types of public service functions, includes custodial, cafeterial, transportation, and healthcare. That's $2 billion annually, and it goes on and on, one of which the state is supposedly taking up, which is the prevailing wage type laws and stuff like that. But it comes up well over $8 billion. So to say that we can't attack the spending before we start taxing pensions, making the state even less competitive, and chasing out those next generations that the lieutenant governor, it just doesn't make sense. Anyway, those booklets are there. I won't belabor it. But without the first focus, concentration on spending reductions, way out of control, and way out of the ordinary, you can't phase out the state income taxes. And I don't mean just corporate, that 6% nonsense, but also the personal income tax. There are 9 states, folks, 9 of them in the U.S. that have no income tax, 7 of them with neither the corporate nor the personal income tax. Those states, by the way, even in the midst of the worst recession since the Great Depression, gained population 80,000 and took in another $1 billion of income. So those are the 2 first functions, is relief on the spending side, which gives you relief on the incentives, that is, improves the income tax competitiveness. And then third, this is by no means the last, is the past right-to-work legislation here in Michigan, bringing us into competitive alignment with 22 other states. Here are the reasons. By the way, family of 4 over the past 35 years has enjoyed a premium on states. Next slide. And per capita personal income. To an economist, this is the most significant, most salient slide of all, because this is the indicator, the best indicator I've ever seen of material well-being of a population. And again, 60% of the states that were in the top 10 are right-to-work states. To me, it's unassailable. So I firmly believe that reform-minded officials do have the tools to convince the public that we do know how to transform our economy from a dead cat bounce into an unstoppable tiger. And when these reforms begin to occur, you'll see real GDP growth average a robust 4 to 5% real annually for a good long time, half a decade. Similarly, the unemployment rates will plummet to 4 to 5% by the year 2015. The Dow Jones obviously will shoot well above the prior peak of 14,200. Right now, the problem, as I said, is that America remains very skittish, uncertain about the future, and the world no longer takes us seriously. But remember, this was the perfect constellation of events that converted a Carter-era disaster to a Reagan world of recovery, reform, and respect, at least for about a decade. Despite the daily exigencies of our jobs, and they're just getting more severe, we must remain politically engaged and vigilant and constructive and confident. And if we can get it right and keep it right, there'll be no generation in America that's ever done what we've done. Then our economy will regain its equilibrium and bring astounding prosperity, energy to the future generations. May it come very soon in the new year. Thank you.